All right, here we are on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know, we do this every day of the week, Monday through Friday, releasing Morning Pitt video just to kind of talk about whatever's going on in the world of Pitt sports, whether it's depth chart updates, senior left tackles being out for the season, sophomore wide receivers opting to transfer, the game coming up, the games that already happened, looking around the coastal. I mean, I like to think that whatever Pitt fans might be interested in on any given day, that's what we talk about here on the Morning Pitt. And just kind of give you something to think about during the day. You know, you want to go talk to your other Pitt fans, be like, hey man, you know, I was thinking about this. And it might be something you heard or thought about on this show in the morning. Of course, if you have things that you think we should be talking about that we're not, feel free to send those along, put them in the comments here on the video, or email, reach out over Twitter, however it is you want to contact us. You can always offer suggestions. We always look forward to that. And then, while you're here, like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That like button, you can see it, the subscribe button. There's one right down there it's in that yellow .com bubble. There's like a little blue rectangle. I need to update that and make it a little bit more visible. But click that button, you'll subscribe. And then you can make sure you never miss any of our Morning Pitt videos on Monday through Friday, or the live Panther-Lair show like we did last night at 8:30 p.m., or the post-game show that we'll do after the game on Saturday. Pitt's at Louisville on Saturday, 8 o'clock kickoff. Who knows what time that game is going to end, and who knows what time we'll go live for the Panther-Lair show. But if you subscribe to our YouTube, the Panther-Lair postgame, but if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, you turn on notifications, you'll get an alert sent right to your phone, so you'll know when we're going live, and you'll never miss any of our Pitt video content, like the live shows, which are a lot of fun, especially the postgame. I mean, we have a good time on the Panther-Lair show on Wednesday nights, but the postgame shows are probably the most fun, I gotta say. We get the chat screen going there, and you post your comments and your questions. We're all talking about the game. Everybody, a lot of people have had a couple cold ones, so it gets a little lively. It gets a little interesting. It's a lot of fun. So if you haven't tuned in for one of these before, you definitely should check it out this Saturday night after the game right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And Saturday's game is going to be an interesting one for a lot of reasons. We'll talk about keys to the game tomorrow. We'll really kind of break down some of the important matchups. It does look like Malik Cunningham, the Louisville quarterback who has missed some time due to a concussion, is going to be back. He's been cleared to practice this week. You would expect him to play this weekend, which presents a challenge because Malik Cunningham is a good quarterback. He's a mobile quarterback, sort of quietly one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC last season. Lost in the shuffle of Kenny Pickett and Brennan Armstrong and Sam Howell and Sam Hartman and it seemed like the Tyler Van Dyke who emerged. It seemed like the list went on and on and on of great quarterbacks, but you had to go for a while before anybody started talking about Malik Cunningham, despite him putting up some pretty eye-popping numbers both with the run and the pass. And so we'll talk about that a lot tomorrow, about what Pitt needs to do and kind of Pitt's history against those types of quarterbacks, those sort of running quarterbacks who present that kind of threat. But it's going to be interesting on the Pitt side too, because I expect them to get Rodney Hammond back. Hammond hasn't played since the West Virginia game. He's missed the last 5. And he's obviously, it's hard to say he's the best back on Pitt's roster. Izzy Abanikanda has pretty firmly established himself as such. When you break a Tony Dorsett record that stood for 46 years, you can probably say you're the best back on the roster. But Rodney Hammond is a clear number 2. He's Robin to Batman in this situation, and I don't think he's that far off. And I think if they have to go with him or rely on him long term, they're going to be in good shape. And if they're able to bounce both of those guys out there, either kind of back and forth, where you have Abanikanda running for a while, and then you give him a break, and Hammond comes in. I mean, Andre Powell talked about it at the beginning of the season that last year, Rodney Hammond was coming in the fourth quarter when the defense was worn down and he was fresh, and he was taking advantage of it and getting a lot of yards and a lot of production as a result. If you do that throughout the game and you just keep bouncing back and forth between these two guys, maybe not every series, but every couple of possessions, you're going to keep them fresh and you're going to wear down the defense, any defense. I think out of the 6 that they play over the rest of the regular season, they're going to be able to run on them. They should be able to run on them. Particularly when you've got this tandem. They're also going to be able to use those guys at the same time. You're going to put I would expect them to put Abanikanda and Hammond in the backfield together, because why wouldn't you? These are two of your best playmakers right now. And it might not just be right now. I mean, all season, these are two of your best offensive playmakers. Put them both out there, make it more difficult to defend, so you're not just running power and counter and zone reads and or zone blocking all the time. Put two of them out there and make it even more challenging to figure out where the ball is going to go and what's going to happen with it. And so I think, I mean, it's a huge boost for Pitt's offense to get Rodney Hammond back. But as I was thinking about Hammond, and I was thinking about some comments that Randy Bates made this week, I started thinking about injuries and how big of an impact injuries really have had for this Pitt football team. Randy Bates brought it up. We talked to him on Tuesday. It's the first time we've talked to him since the Monday before the West Virginia game. So we've gone that long without talking to Pitt's defensive coordinator. That's a rant for another day, but I could definitely offer that rant at some point. We're still waiting to talk to Frank Cignetti. We haven't talked to him since the Monday before the West Virginia game, but I digress. So when we got a chance to talk to Randy Bates, it's coming out of the bye week or the off week. It's coming out of, it's right in the middle of the season, 6 games down, 6 games left to play. And I said, what have you seen out of the defense? How have they lived up to or not lived up to your expectations thus far? And he said, I think we've been inconsistent. And he went on to talk about injuries. He said they've had, more than half of their top 22 miss at least one half of a game so far. And I kind of went and added it up, and I more or less see where Bates is going with that. I can't quite get to 11 guys who have missed at least a half of football, but there may have been a time when Judson Tallender wasn't available for a half, or Javon McIntyre wasn't available for a half, something like that. And so I'm not going to hold him to the details on that, but I did start looking around and counting up 2 deep players who have missed at least one full game. All right, so we won't count Servassier Dennis missing the second half of the Virginia Tech game, although that was a significant absence to take him out of the lineup when you already don't have Brandon George, who we will count here. But I did talk, I think on Tuesday, about how Dennis being out allowed Shane Simon to work in the middle of the defense, which could open up opportunities for Pitt down the road to use Servassier Dennis outside, because Shane Simon seemed to play really well at middle linebacker. And maybe you have a few more options in terms of how you fit those guys together, than instead of being, Dennis in the middle, flanked by Shane Simon and Bengali Kamara, maybe Simon goes in the middle and Dennis has an opportunity to make a few more plays from an outside linebacker position. And I talked about that on Tuesday. That was sort of the upside, the silver lining of Servassier Dennis not being able to play in that half of a game. And so I think there have been a few guys, Tyler Bentley only played 6 snaps against Rhode Island, a couple in the first half, a couple in the second half. He was probably hurt. And that was sandwiched by 2 games where he played a dozen snaps, I think, against Western Michigan and Georgia Tech. He played about a dozen snaps each. So he clearly was not at full strength. But I'm not going to count those guys. I'm going to just look at the guys who have missed at least one full game this season off the 2 deep. 2 deep players who have missed at least one full game. And my count, and I might have missed somebody, I have 16 players who have, from the 2 deep, who have missed at least one full game. On offense, you have Keaton Slovis and Nick Patty, and I think we include Nick Patty because his absence led to the 3rd string quarterback playing, so I am going to count him here. You have those 2 guys. You have Rodney Hammond. Jared Wayne and Kanate Mumfield each missed one game. Mumfield didn't play against Virginia Tech. Wayne missed the Rhode Island game. And then on the offense, Carter Johnson didn't play in that season opener, if you recall. And then on the offensive line, Carter Warren, Owen Drexel, and Gabe Hoy have all missed time and missed at least one full game and multiple full games, actually, for each of those guys. That's 9 players off the offensive 2 deep who have missed at least one full game this season. On defense, there's only 7, but it's still a significant group. I mean, up front, you have 3 defensive ends, and Haba Baldonado, Deslin Alexander, and Deion Hayes. They've each missed at least one full game. Hayes is still out. He played 2 games, and he's still out. Alexander got hurt in the opener against West Virginia and didn't return until, 2 games ago. And he played the Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech game, so he's only played 3 games. Baldonado, I think, maybe only missed the Rhode Island game, the only full game, but he missed a significant chunk, I think, of the Western Michigan game. That might have been one where he got hurt, but he's missed a lot of time. Devin Danielson has missed a couple of games. Brandon George has only played in 1 or 2 games, and I'm not sure when or if he's going to be back. Marquez Williams sat out a game. Rashad Battle was a 2-deep guy. Presumably the fourth corner. You're talking about Rashad Battle being the fourth corner, which puts him firmly on the 2-deep and firmly in place or in line for snaps. Certainly in case of an injury, like with Marquez Williams missing the Rhode Island game, but also just in the rotation that they try to have at cornerback, where they want to rotate 4 guys in. And Rashad Battle is lost for the season. And I'm not even including Nate Temple, who became a 2-deep guy after Dayon Hayes got hurt. But we could throw him in there too. We're talking about 17 players who have missed at least 1 game. 17 guys from the 2-deep. And even if we don't count Temple, you're looking at 16, right? And your 2-deep, you have 11. How many you have? 22 on each side. So you have 44 guys on the 2-deep on offense and defense. 16. That's more than a third. Have missed at least 1 full game. And while I think there's probably a segment of a fan base, of the Pitt fan base or any fan base that says injuries are an excuse, next man up, you have to have recruited well enough to have the depth to overcome these kinds of things. And there's truth to that. I also don't think you can entirely ignore when you've got that kind of absence. Take the offensive line, for example. All right, and I think we've talked about this. You've got, Carter Warren, Owen Drexel, Gabe Hoy. Gabe Hoy missed the first couple games. He's getting back into the rotation. Owen Drexel only played a game or 2, and he got hurt, and he's going to be out for a while. Carter Warren's season is over after playing just, 3 games or something like that. But what you end up with is an offensive line that returned a lot of starting experience, and we were all excited about all those guys coming back. And you haven't had a single snap where all of those returning starters played together this season. And what's more is right now, as you enter the second half of the season, you only have 1 of those returning starters playing the position that he played last season. And that's Marcus Minor at left guard. Jake Cradle's back, but or at least starting. Guys who are starting. Jake Cradle's back, but he's starting at center now after Drexel's injury. Gabe Hoy is back on the field, but he's not in the starting lineup. I would expect him to continue working behind Matt Gonsalves at right tackle. And then obviously, when you move Cradle from right guard to center, you've got Blake Zabovic stepping in at right guard. And then when you lose Carter Warren, you've got Branson Taylor stepping in. So we can talk about this offensive line being a disappointment. And I think there's a fair argument to be made there when you talk about the expectations and the hype. Just coming out of the West Virginia game, the coaches and the players talked about how disappointed they were with their performance, that maybe they read too much of their own clippings and all this stuff, right? But the reality is now, 6 games into the season, while you might still consider some of the offensive line performance to be disappointing, I don't think you can discuss it without also considering the fact that all those returning starters, only 1 guy is starting in the spot where he played last year. And so you basically have, if not an entirely new group, you've got a drastically different picture than you had coming into the season. And I don't think that can be ignored. Now, we say all this, and they're coming off a game where Izzy Abanikanda just rushed for 320 yards. And I think the pass protection was generally pretty good for Keaton Slovis in that Virginia Tech game. And so maybe they're making the most of the situation. And it's not like they don't have talented players. I think Branson Taylor is going to be really good. I think Ryan Baer, who's now the backup left tackle, although he might be kind of third effectively if Matt Gonsalves is still sort of probably going to step in at left tackle if Branson Taylor gets hurt. But Taylor is a talented player. I think Gonsalves is pretty good. I think Zabovic is pretty good. They've still got talented players out there, but they don't necessarily have the experience that last year's group had. They have some experience, but they don't have the experience that the group you expected to have of Carter Warren and Marcus Minor and Owen Drexel and Jake Cradle and Gabe Hoy. They don't have the experience that group would have had, and would have had entering the season and would have been building on through the first 6 games of the season. That's a significant change. Taking Rodney Hammond out of the mix. And again, this is, Izzy Abanikanda is one of the leading rushers in the nation. He's one of the leading rushers in the ACC. He's one of the top running backs in the country right now. And so you don't cry too much about the running back situation, but it would be better with Rodney Hammond. It's really good now with Abanikanda. It would be even better with Abanikanda and Rodney Hammond. Konate Mumfield missed one game and it ended up being a win. Nick Patty missed a couple games. He was not in uniform for a few games. He was finally in uniform for this last game, this Virginia Tech game. I'm not sure if he was in uniform for the Georgia Tech game, but I don't think that would have made a difference there. Konate Mumfield wasn't in uniform for the Virginia Tech game, but Pitt obviously won that one. So, you don't say, oh, they would have won if they had this or they had that. It's more about the overall picture of the team, the overall health of the team, the overall kind of status of the team. When we talk about the impact these injuries have had, maybe some of them you say, oh, it wasn't that big a deal because they ended up winning the game that Konate Mumfield missed, or they ended up winning the game that Nick Patty missed. And that's true, but I think taking those guys out of the mix decreases the effect. Taking Mumfield out of the mix, taking Warren, Drexel, Hoy, Jared Wayne missed the one game out of the mix. That cuts down on the overall effectiveness of the offense and probably slows down the progress of the offense, of getting better, of getting more comfortable together on the field. And of course, we can't leave the offense without talking about Kedon Slovis. Kedon Slovis missed a game and a half, and I think most would agree he hasn't been himself since he came back. Since he came back in the Rhode Island game and then the Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech games. He hasn't looked like he did in the second half of the West Virginia game and the first half of the Tennessee game. And so there is another situation where an injury seemingly had a significant impact on the team this year. So when we're talking about impact of injuries, do they beat Tennessee if Slovis doesn't get hurt? I think there's probably a pretty good chance. Do they beat Georgia Tech if Slovis doesn't get hurt? I think there's a pretty good chance. It's impossible for us to measure what he would have been against Georgia Tech if he hadn't gotten hurt against Tennessee. But if he played against Georgia Tech the way he played in the first half against Tennessee or the second half against West Virginia, I think you would assume that they could do better than 9 points or whatever it was going into the fourth quarter. I think they could outscore Georgia Tech a little bit better than they ultimately did. So when we talk about injuries, and again, you don't want to make excuses, but I also don't think you can ignore these things as a factor this season and an element that has had an impact on this season. And you flip over to defense, missing Halba Baldonado for any amount of time is a negative. And if there are lingering impacts or lingering effects from his injury, that's very significant on a team where that hasn't been getting really any production out of its defensive ends. The production from the defensive ends is far off what it was a year ago and far off from what those guys expect from themselves. But when you've had Halba Baldonado miss a game or two, Deslin Alexander miss like 3 games, Dayon Hayes miss like 4 games, that is going to cut into your defensive end production. I think you'll like the potential for Bam Brima. I think he's going to be a good player. I think Nikai Johnson has a good future. I think he can be a good player down the road. But I don't think you can expect those guys to produce like Baldonado and Alexandra and what you would expect from Hayes when they're stepping in to play for the first time. And then you have sort of the lingering effects of Baldonado then coming back and maybe being less than 100%. He's not making as much of an impact. Now, Randy Bates talked about there are pressures, and some of the plays that were almost interceptions in the Georgia Tech game, they came from pressure. So it's not like they're not creating pressure, but they're also not finishing the plays. They need to be able to finish the plays, and I'm sure that's a point of emphasis for this defense and the line and those ends going forward. They need to be able to finish the plays, and they haven't so far. And whether that's due to the quarterback getting rid of the ball quickly or whether that's due to Baldonado and Alexander being slowed by injury, is anyone's guess. But that position has not produced, and you've got 3 guys who have missed multiple games. I think I can add that up. Devin Danielson has missed a couple of games as well when you talk about the defensive tackle position. And then Brandon George, the backup middle linebacker. Servassier Dennis is one of your best defensive players. And so you say, well, how much do you really need the backup middle linebacker? And I think that's true, but I think Brandon George is good enough you could count on him to give Servassier Dennis a rest. And I think you could look at Dennis, potentially playing at a higher level if he did get some extra rest. If he wasn't playing 90 snaps a game, I think which game was it? Maybe the Georgia Tech game. He played every snap. I mean, you don't want to have that situation. You don't want to have that situation in virtually any position, aside from maybe like quarterback and offensive line. You don't want to have that situation, but that's what they had to do. And, this past game, the Virginia Tech game, I think Savasi Dennis got some snaps off only because he got hurt and had to come out of the game at halftime. And Shane Simon stepped in the middle and then played almost the entire second half at middle linebacker. That cuts into the depth at a position where there isn't a ton of depth. And we talked about linebackers a lot in the offseason about the lack of depth at those three positions. To take one guy out of it, even if he's a backup, that cuts down on the depth even more. Marquez Williams missed one game. That was the Rhode Island game. Maybe you don't say that had too big of an impact, but Rashad Battle, again, as your fourth corner, that's somebody you're probably missing. And I think the secondary has played well. I think the corners have been good. I think the safeties have been good. I think, you could certainly point out plays where they've gotten beat. To which I would say, are you not used to that by now? It's been happening for 8 years, and it's going to continue to happen. It's the way they play defense. On occasion, the corners are going to get beat. On occasion, the linebackers are going to read run and get sucked up into the run play and give a slot receiver full head of steam running straight out of safety, and that's a tough position to cover. On the whole, playing within this defense, I think the corners have done pretty well, and I think the safeties have been pretty good. But you'd like to have more guys out there. You'd like to be able to rotate through a top four at cornerback. And they weren't able to do that, certainly in the one game when Williams was out. And then even more so, without Rashad Battle for virtually the entire season at this point. And maybe someone with more of an eye toward research than myself, and I might actually ask Pat Narduzzi about this when he meets the media later today. But maybe someone with more of an eye toward research can look and see if this is the most injuries Pitt has had in a year under Narduzzi. It feels like it to me. It feels like they've lost a lot of guys to injury this year. Maybe this is just paying off the balance of last season where they really didn't have too many injury issues on the whole. Or maybe it's just what happens in football, and sometimes you get them in bunches. But they've definitely lost a lot of... They've missed a lot of games. They've had a lot of games missed due to injuries. I think that's part of the story with this season. And I don't think we can talk about this season without talking about it. We don't necessarily have to make excuses with it, but I think we have to at least consider that when you have 17 guys from the two deep missing at least one game each, and in most cases more, I think you have to consider that makes an impact. I think so. All right, make sure you stay tuned right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe, like this video, and you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. And then stay tuned on Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards where you can talk with other Pitt fans about all of your favorite Pitt topics. Football, basketball, recruiting, off topic to some extent. We do have boundaries that we try to hold to. But it's a great place to interact with other Pitt fans. I think it's the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find. And then we have everything we do on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, like the Panther-Lair show last night at 8:30 live right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. The post-game show we will do on Saturday night, again, right here live on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks so much for tuning in to this today. Hope you've had a great week so far. We're almost to Friday. Looking forward to it as always. And we will be back with you Friday morning for another edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.